resume our discussion on the history and philosophy of education prior to Islam. History and philosophy of education prior to Islam, which will serve as a background before we finally tackle the concept of education in Islam, which is the text that has been produced by Professor Syed Muhiyuddin Al-Attas. In the last session, we have discussed, albeit very briefly, something which is requiring a lot of depth and a lot of work has been done, i.e. the conception of the paideia, which is the Greek conception of education. And as we said, that the Greek conception and practice of education is not restricted certainly to any one particular theorist or practitioner, but it has been the labor of several centuries and many thinkers and many educators and practitioners. But overall, there has been you can see an overall picture whereby the Greeks fundamentally agree on the nature of education. As we said last time, that it involves in the beginning training of the training of the body through gymnastics, and then the training of the spirit through music, including emotions. So today we wish to continue on this by elaborating on another fundamental concept or tool of learning, which is called the 7 liberal arts. First and foremost, why are they called the liberal arts? Well, it is not necessarily understood and as how we understand being liberal today, as a person who adheres perhaps to the philosophy of liberalism, or a person who's liberal is perhaps somebody who is not conservative. But rather, the notion liberal arts must be referred to its original conception within the state of society in which it emerged. And last time we mentioned 2 types of society in which liberal education can be thought about, which was the Spartan and the Athenian models. And when we say liberal arts pertaining to the Spartan and the Athenian models, and perhaps we can extend this example to that to India, and presently to today's discussion, Rome, liberal arts simply refer to the proper education that is worthy of a person who is free, a free man. Yes, meaning to say not a slave, not a foreigner. Yes, that is the meaning of a liberal education. And of course, there is a secondary meaning that has come to be attached to it. And this perhaps in reference to the statement of Augustine, one of the doctors of Christianity, one of the important figures in the history of Catholicism specifically, but more generally in Christian thought, who said that as a result of his liberal education, he became free to understand the writings of others, meaning to say there wasn't a composition that he was not able to understand, and at the same time there wasn't anything that crossed his mind except that he is able to articulate it. Yes, so meaning to say that the statement by Augustine here suggests to us that the focus of the liberal education is the development of the faculty of language. And as we know, the faculty of language, which is comprised of words, forming sentences, forming prose or verse, in order to express feelings, emotions, and thoughts. Well, these are covered in the trivium. Yes, these are covered in the trivium, the 3 propedeutic or preparatory sciences of language, one of which is rhetoric, the other is grammar, and thirdly, it is dialectic or logic. Of course, in total, the number of the liberal arts would form 7. Yes, so therefore you add to the trivium, which is focused on language, the quadrivium, which is more focused on the Pythagorean metaphysics. The Pythagorean belief or the Pythagorean metaphysics assumes that there is a musical harmony. There is a musical harmony to the cosmos, to such an extent that the cosmos is properly arranged, and that there are several sciences, let us say mathematics, which is mainly arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. These are all interrelated, meaning to say mastering with one would lead to the gradual mastery of the other. And Pythagoras did develop a cosmological theory that involves a musical harmony of the celestial spheres. Yes, and this continued in the study. So basically, the quantitative sciences are then studied as part of the quadrivium, whereas the qualitative sciences pertaining to emotions and feelings and thought, these are studied as part of the trivium. And together, the trivium and the quadrivium comprises the 7 liberal arts. Now, the 7 liberal arts, as we say, is a product, first and foremost, of Greek civilization. But then we know the history of Roman society, empire, and civilization, that the Romans gradually adopted forms, ideals, and thought patterns of the Greeks, including their own contribution and their own, let us say, proclivities. They too incorporated the liberal arts within their ideal of the educated man. And then eventually, within the setting of the Roman Empire, we know that Western Christianity came to be formed with regards to its thought patterns, its literary products, seeing that the early Christian fathers, most of them were received, let us say, the liberal arts education, including the literature of the Greeks and the Romans. Then later on, as we know, with regards to the liberal arts, it extended well into the into parts of the Middle East, and via the translation movement, we know that, and also the encounter of Islam with Western civilization, Greek civilization and the Christians and so on. Eventually, there came to be an incorporation, albeit within the limitations of the, meaning to say, an incorporation within the madrasa system, but adopted and adapted within the restrained limits of the Islamic intellectual tradition. And by that we mean that when the liberal arts is pursued in the madrasa system, it is not the same, because we can imagine an alternative route of development, although there are parallel stories. With regards to the development of the trivium, yes, the Latin people developed the sciences of language very well in terms of one of its purpose. Yes, we say that one of the achievements that the Latin people, the Romans, were very proud of was because they were able to perfect the science of language, comprising, as we said, grammar, rhetoric, and logic, to the extent that they were able to preserve the Latin sounds. Yes, the aim of the linguistic sciences was to preserve the purity of the Latin sounds against the insurrection of the barbarians, insurrection of the Greeks, and the many users of the language. And we know there is a parallel story in the history of grammar in Islam, or rather in the history of Nahu, in that Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib instructed Abu Aswad ad-Du'ali, yes, on the basics or the fundamentals of grammar, also out of fear, or rather out of the worry that the purity of the Arabic language was being tainted as a result of the commingling of the early Muslims, who were both Arabs and the non-Arabs. Yes, and there was also another famous story that is recounted in the books of grammar, whereby, who was it that whose daughter mispronounced ma ajmala hadhihi well, there is perhaps he was one of the Sahaba or the Tabi'in who asked her father, or rather her father made a remark, yes, what is the beauty of the night? But in Arabic, you can have, depending on the passing of the sentence, either it would mean what is the beauty of the night, or how beautiful the night is. Yes, and seeing that the daughter answered or one was unable to determine which one was it, the father then understood that basically there has been a compromise in the quality of the Arabic language, in that what was inbuilt in the structure of the language is now diluted with regards to the new generation as a result of their commingling with other non-native speakers, as well as those who are perhaps not very careful with the usage of the language. So certainly the development of the linguistic sciences, the trivium particularly, has a function of preserving the purity of the original language. And with regards to Islam, we know that there is an extra motivation with regards to the preservation of the trivium, because the form of revelation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen to speak to mankind is via via a language which is revealed. Yes, and that is the Arabic language, which is specifically mentioned in the Quran. So therefore, the preservation of grammar, the preservation of the science of rhetoric, and the preservation of the science of logic or dialectic is certainly important with regards to the understanding of the basic text. To return now to the Roman Empire. So we know that the last time when we were making a survey of the Greek civilization, Aristotle of Stagira was the tutor of Alexander of Macedonia, and the Macedonians had gradually conquered the Greeks and expanded the empire during his lifetime, until eventually, not exceeding, say, 2 centuries after the time of Alexander, we saw the rise of the Roman Empire, which then included the Greeks. So as early as 250 BC, as early as 250 before Common Era, the Latins had already been successful in translating the entirety of the Homer's epic, Homer's epic of the Odyssey, or perhaps the Iliad. And in the space of further 2 centuries, let us say in 55 BC, now the Latins had produced their own literary giants, yes, the likes of what would gradually include the pantheon, would include the likes of Cicero, Virgil, Horace, and several other great great speakers and great writers of literature. Plutarch would make his way also in the let us say in the golden age of the literary production of the Hellenistic period. Now, during this Hellenistic period, we see that in philosophy, as we have covered in our history of philosophy series, in philosophy, what tended to develop was the school of the ethics, the school of ethics, the ethicists amongst the Stoics, the Epicureans, and the new Platonists. The focus was gradually more inward, and the purpose was the achievement of happiness. Yes, but where the liberal arts was concerned, as we know, the purpose of developing these liberal arts is in order to tackle several of the great literary products. Plutarch used to say that useless is the liberal arts education, or useless is the art of poetry, which is incompatible with philosophy. Yani, the ultimate purpose of a liberal arts education would be to be able to interpret the greater works of the school, or the greater works of the scholars. So we know that the great works of the scholars are of 2 natures. Yes, one is the literary products of the likes of Homer and Pindar and several of the great poets who produce great epics. On the other hand, you have great productions of philosophy, science, and mathematics and thought, And this would include the histories of Thucydides and the history of Herodotus, as well as the philosophy fractions of Plato or Nell. So the education that you go is in order to prepare you to be able to read the great works. And within the during the Roman the high end of the Roman period, the educated gentleman of that time was not expected to master, was not expected to be conversant with a lot of books, but he will be more respected if he knew a few very well. In their education system,
I think the line breaks. Apologies, everyone. We are working on the technical part, inshallah, so I hope all of you can wait for a while. Apologies for this inconvenience. Okay, Ustaz is back, Alhamdulillah. By the way, I would like to remind everyone, please check your microphone because just now we heard some baby or children crying in the background. But Ustaz is back, Alhamdulillah. So, tafadhal Ustaz, you may continue.
all right. Apologies for the brief interruption. So we will continue then, inshallah, our brief survey, and we have gotten to the part of being an educated Roman citizen, and we said that with regards to the proper aim of education, that it is better that a person be educated, or rather knows a few books, knows a few great books thoroughly, compared to knowing or being conversant with several others, but not necessarily thoroughly. By the time of the Roman Empire, as we know, that education is the responsibility of the free citizen, and the citizens, as we know, this is not much different from what we have discussed with regards to the Greeks, but the Spartans and the Athenians, and also, as we have compared last time with the Indians, that it is a specific case in society that pursues the the life of the mind or the life of the intellect. But one crucial difference in the Roman period compared to the Athenian or the Indian period is with regards to the purpose of the liberal arts education. The purpose of education in the higher sense of education at the philosophical level for the Indians is basically to liberate himself from the fetters of this world. In the Greek educational ideal, the purpose of education is for the refinement of the intellect. The Romans, on the other hand, they saw that the great flowering of your education is your ability for public service. And public service via the capacity to construct effective speeches, and of course to serve in juries and several other functions. In other words, that it is in the Romans that we see that the purpose of education ultimately is to be a good citizen, to be a good citizen. So therefore, in the basic breakup of education, you have in the first 7 years, and this again is one other thing that we should note when we are doing and studying the several societies. In all these societies, the first 7 years tended to be the responsibility of the household. Yes, be it amongst the Greeks, the Indians, the Persians. We have it also in amongst the Romans, that the first 7 years was the responsibility of the household, meaning the direct parents of the child, to provide education. Then the young Roman citizen would be under the care of a tutor who taught the elementary sciences, yes, which would include introductions to language and gymnastics and several other aspects of education. And depending on talent and proclivities, they might then be turned over to the grammatici, or what you call the grammarians, when they between the ages of 12 to, let us say, maybe 17 or 18. And that would be the crux of the education. And what is the function of the grammarian in this case? It is not how we might understand perhaps grammar today in the restricted sense of the word. The grammarian, properly, if we are to compare him to a figure in the Islamic intellectual tradition, would be someone like a sharih, yes, a person who is who explicates on the great texts. So the function of the grammarian is to first to explain the more complex, or rather the rarely used vocabularies. The second function is to be able to construct and elaborate etymology of words. Thirdly, is to provide explanations with regards to historical events, persons, and then to provide references with regards to places. And then finally, the fourth, yes, and this is added, the three qualities just now was summarized by Plutarch, and Quintilian adds a fourth function, which is to explicate on philosophical and scientific matters. So you can imagine this is not a simple task. And as we know today, one of the failures of, and this is, I think, one of the failures of modern education, is because it doesn't provide a proper training in language. We have now come to produce a new generation of ignoramuses, meaning to say that they have all these texts around them, but they have no ability to read them properly. And when we recommend them to read, say, Mortimer Adler's How to Read a Book, they say, well, isn't that some level of inception that that you are asking me to read a book in order to know how to read a book? Yes, without knowing that if they have, if only they are able to overcome that sort of overbearing self-confidence, they would certainly benefit from Mortimer Adler's writing on how to read a book, specifically because books are not all of the same quality. Yes, some books are merely skimmed through for information, but there are other books that requires ruminations. And then there are books, yes, especially with regards to a living tradition, such as the Islamic intellectual tradition, the Christian monastic, and then eventually the scholastic tradition, the Greek philosophical texts. These great works will require commentaries in order for us to properly benefit from them. And within the Islamic intellectual tradition, we know that the scholars, divide the kinds of books that are into mutun, yes, basically texts, which are usually terse, impenetrable to the unprepared, and usually taken in the beginning as something to be memorized, to be read again as you read the commentaries and the super commentaries, yani the sharah and the hashiyah, the super commentaries that provides what we call glosses. And this is the purpose. And when we look at the glory of the Islamic intellectual tradition towards the post-Ghazalian, post-Avicennan, post-Averroistic period, you will find that the great productions of the ulama of the Hijaz, the ulama of Azhar, and of course North Africa, including of course the Al-Ba'alawi tradition, their great achievements and contributions have been in the writings of such commentaries, super commentaries, and glosses, to such an extent that it grants the student of knowledge properly a deep reading of texts. And when you look at the sort of examinations that would be set by the masters of the tradition for those who would graduate with an alamiyah or something of the sort, this is a very grueling test, because since the Islamic intellectual tradition developed a very strong textual component, in order for the transmission of let us say an oratorical content, say in the hadith and in the Quran, into text, some of the things that becomes transmitted would include the science of the men who report, the science of determining true and false reports. And then once you have the authority of the text well established, the next step would be how to properly read a text. And this is where the significance of the sanad comes into play. But as we have now seen in the Roman period, such traditions of text reading is the substance of intellectual tradition. If we have not done this survey, if we have not understood the nature of intellectual traditions, we are, let us say, it is easy to fall into the pitfall of thinking that great thinkers are somehow mere anomalies, or great thinkers suddenly emerge being able to produce great thoughts. But in most of the cases, in fact, perhaps we can say in all of the cases of the great thinkers, all great thinkers have been products of tradition. Of course, they may be original, but originality must be set within a stable system. You may have revolutionary thinkers. You may have thinkers, especially in the natural sciences, who leads a paradigmatic shift. Yes, like let us say Newton, and previously the group of scholars who led the Copernican revolution, or you have more recently the likes of an Einstein and Thomas Kuhn and several other philosophers of science. You will see that what they write appears to be brilliant and original, but their originality is always juxtaposed against the stability of tradition. And Newton himself, despite being able to come up with a new, let us say, cosmological picture of the universe, which is mechanistic in nature, has had to rely on the mathematics, physics, philosophy, even the linguistic sciences of the past masters. And he summarizes it very well by saying that he's able to achieve great heights precisely because he's standing on the shoulders of giants. Now, to return to the wonders of the liberal arts tradition, yes, the ilmul alat, let us say, yes, to the wonders of the liberal arts tradition. Within the Roman Empire, the problem came to be amorality, yes, and the collapse of the ethical man because of the worldliness of the Roman Empire. Gradually, the empire was collapsing from within. Fortunately, I suppose, as the writer of the author of Destiny has deigned, we see that within the internal structure of the flowering of Roman education and the Roman ideal of the civitas and the civic ideals and the man of great service to as a citizen, we see the gradual growth of Christianity, Western Christianity in particular, within this tradition, within this mold. To such an extent that despite the years of persecution, the early Christian fathers, yes, the likes of an Origen, the likes of Tertullian, including Augustine himself and several others amongst these leading early fathers of Christianity, most of them were products of the liberal arts education. Most of them were products of the classical education. They knew their Plato very well. They knew their Herodotus and Thucydides very well, and they knew their certainly their Cicero and their more contemporary classical authors. But at the same time, having this knowledge, they were trying to explain an alien body of religious and ethical tradition and thought within this thought structure. And of course, side note, Professor Al-Attas has mentioned that this is amongst the causes that led to gradual secularization for not doing it properly, or perhaps due to the weakness of the reporting with regards to their original scripture. But nonetheless, they were thriving within the system to such an extent that I think in the year, I have it here, in the year 362, yes, the Emperor Julian, I suppose, he promulgated an edict forbidding Christians to teach the classical education. And why is that? Because, as we said, that the Christians have started to excel in the sciences, and they were adopting the sciences to teach their own body of knowledge. In between the, before the edict of 362, we know that Christianity has had its own Judaic, Hebraic model of education in the person of Jesus, yes, Jesus Christ in their tradition. We know that in the New Testament, there are pedagogic methods that are employed by Jesus, which is, let us say, reminiscent. As Muslims, when we look at that, we see some resemblances, at least where pedagogy and method is concerned. The method or the philosophy of education, the method of education employed by Jesus and his disciples, as recorded in what would become the canonical New Testament, is that he would use parables, metaphors. He would use questions and answers, and he would also use the method of the lecture. Yes, especially as evident in the Sermon on the Mount. And overall, the effectiveness of his teaching is, suggests to us, at least where pedagogy is concerned, we may disagree with the content, but where pedagogy is concerned, it is prophetic in method. Yes, it is prophetic in method, in the sense that the teacher's purpose is not to demonstrate to others his rhetorical abilities. The teacher's purpose is not to demonstrate to others his erudition, but rather the purpose of the teacher as a moral and religious teacher is to effect change in the other person, is to produce discipline in the other person, is to produce the internal hal that is required in the person. And in this regard, yes, the Jesus of the New Testament provides the content of the moral education of the Hebraic people, and then eventually when as we know what would come to characterize early Christianity, it became transported into the Latin world of Rome. And in the Latin world, we see then that these Christian fathers were struggling to accommodate the contents of Christianity with the forms and the formal structure of the liberal education of the Roman Empire. And to a certain extent, it reached its culmination in the person of Augustine. As we know, Augustine has a very interesting biography, and perhaps he has written one of the most well-known autobiographies in history, called the Confessions. But his philosophy of education is interesting because what he managed to salvage of the liberal arts is to use reason in service for a moral theology. To use reason, or to use the liberal arts in service for a moral theology. He understood the significance of the liberal arts in order to interpret scripture. So he added then, just as the goal of the liberal arts in the classical period was to read the great texts, Augustine made the purpose of studying the great arts, the liberal arts, was in order to understand the scriptures, particularly the Old and the New Testaments. And then, of course, this is still in the 5th century. Eventually, you would, as we follow the survey onwards, you would find that well, in between the next great revolution in Christian educational thought is the period of the Muslims, and then you would have Thomas Aquinas, who then initiated a new movement. He became one of the most well-known representatives of scholasticism. Yes, by the time of the movement of scholasticism, Christianity, or Western Christianity, had already imbibed the influences of the development of Islamic thought, including, of course, the writings of Al-Ghazali, Ibn Sina, Al-Farabi, and Averroes, wherein these thinkers, together with Plato and Aristotle, forms the substance of what we call the higher Middle Ages. Yes, the higher Middle Ages, or the higher medieval period in the 11th and 12th centuries. And this medieval period, yes, and when you look at the grand product, the great synthesis of Thomas Aquinas, yes, which is found in his Summa Theologiae, you will find that the content of education has grown so immensely, such that it now contains the elements of the Greek Homeric ideals, the Platonic and Aristotelian philosophy, the literary products of the classical authors. It contains the commentary tradition of Islam, the legal tradition of Islam. It contains the mystical writings of an Ibn Arabi suited to Western Christianity, but it also contains the practical element of Roman Empire. As we know that the 7 liberal arts within the Roman Empire came to be expanded so as to include medicine, and to include medicine and law. Yes, and so eventually then within the medieval period, it is now a culture that has taken on several cultures of the past, and therein we begin to see the beginnings of the modern university. But of course, more on that later when we do our survey of Islamic education as the basis of the modern educational system. And with that, I think we should yes, we are to the 4 p.m. mark. Let us open for discussions and any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ustaz. And now the floor is open for anyone if you have any question. And alhamdulillah, some of my notes today, Ustaz have recapped the liberal art, the primary and secondary meaning, and mastery of one may lead to mastery of others.
Sorry, your voice is breaking. I didn't.
Test 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me? Yes. Oh, Ustaz line. Okay, but anyway, from the host, we would like to apologize for this technical blips. The Ustaz and the team currently in Tarim, so they are actually on the best internet facility that they can have right now. So hopefully you can bear with us. Apologies again for this technical blips. By the way, yeah, it is Ustaz, isn't it? By the way, the floor is now open. You can ask now, and I will convey the question. I will deliver the question to Ustaz. If you have, if you also want to ask verbally or you want to share your opinion, the floor is open, inshallah. Right? Okay, Ustaz. I think for tonight, alhamdulillah, there's a good 26 of us, good crowd. And in addition from last week's class, about 2 or 3. And thank you very much. Shall we continue, Ustaz? Or we are going to end the session, or if you want to end?
Well, if there is a question, then we can continue.
Okay.
But otherwise,
okay. That's a question. That's a question. Alhamdulillah. Thank you very much, Sufyan. The question is, Assalamualaikum, Ustaz. How has education being degraded into purely factory, almost Fordian system of production, i.e., production of profit? And the question is, how education being degraded into a purely factory, almost Fordian system of production, i.e., production of profit? Fadal, Ustaz.
Okay, mashallah. This is an excellent question. Of course, to be able to properly answer that question, well, first, perhaps we have to terminate our survey until we reach its modern aspects. Yes, but secondly, it would also require a full understanding of the secularization and modernization narrative in the Western civilization, particularly what has happened since the past, let us say, 500 years. As we know, in brief, and we have mentioned this outside in our discussions on the prolegomena to the metaphysics of Islam, that right around the 15th or 16th centuries, there was the twin movement of the Renaissance and the Reformation. And the Renaissance and the Reformation both are, with regards to the history of education, are crucial because it gave birth to a new type of individual and a new type of interpretation of classical foundations. Both movements led to the gradual secularization of society and the liberation of the economic sphere from religious control. And of course, there are other crucial events that has led to the independence or the emancipation of the economic sphere from religious control. One of which was the way the church mishandled the Copernican revolution. Yes, mishandled the Copernican revolution and its treatment of the likes of Giordano Bruno and the likes of Galileo Galilei, that produced a sort of counter experience to the church. The Reformation, led by Martin Luther, Zwingli, and John Calvin, also served to strengthen what was the secular elements that were already contained in the West. So what we know about the Reformation was that the likes of Luther worked together with the secular princes in order to supplant the power of the church. Now, to cut the story short, so this was on the political front. Yes, the political front led to the emancipation of the economic sphere from religious control, the secularization of the church's, let us say, the secularization of the church's property, and then eventually to the birth of a new modern political economic system. And the birth of this new modern economic political system came together also with the birth of the modern universities. And amongst the earliest modern university that has no religious foundation whatsoever was the University of London, which was under the guidance of the likes of Jeremy Bentham and James Mill, the father of John Stuart Mill. And the foundation of this university was founded on the liberal secular ideals. And then, as we know, that since the 15th century or so, Western society came to lose more and more of their interest in the church and whatever that was being offered in terms of the religious doctrines, but at the same time, the secular elements continued to be fostered and developed. Eventually, of course, it came to develop until we see the age of the imperial colonization age, which is better explained using an economic analysis of the expansion of Europe and their desire for greater progress. And progress by now had meant a completely secularized material notion. Eventually, of course, with education becoming no longer sacred, with the sacred elements of society being removed by a disenchantment, you then begin to see a model of a society in which the educational enterprise became subservient to the economic interests of society. And this happened in tandem with the development of the Industrial Revolution and the economic thought of the likes of Adam Smith, and the division of labor and the notion of the free market capitalism. All these several elements working together eventually led to the worship of the factory. And the worship of the factory gradually became replicated to such an extent that the university and the educational system became subservient to the factory. And likewise, with the utilitarians, the likes of Jeremy Bentham, he proposed a notion of a society in which the prison is to be remodeled based on the utilitarian requirements of society, and that's why I think a more accurate analysis is produced by Freud in this regard, or rather Michel Foucault in this regard. But nevertheless, the Benthamite notion of the utilitarian conception of society, i.e., that society should serve utilitarian ends of maximizing pleasure and reducing pain, and pleasure and pain understood as a physical phenomena, you then begin to see the gradual remodeling of the entire state so as to maximize the utilitarian calculus. And this is true of health economics. It became true of the factories. It became true also of the educational institutions. That is in short our brief answer.
Okay. Jazakallah khair, Ustaz. So, Brother Sufyan, I hope the explanation answers your question, which is, I think, our question, actually. Brother Sufyan, I like to thank you very much also for the question. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you, Ustaz, for the answer.
Okay. So, brothers and sisters, thank you again for joining in tonight. I think with that question, we are going to conclude tonight's episode. Alhamdulillah. Again, stick around. We are going to meet again every Monday. From the organizer, we apologize first for the technical error with the meeting ID, but it has been fixed. You can use the link that we have shared. And also about the internet connection, again, they are all in interim, but at the moment that is the best internet facility that they can have. Alhamdulillah. So bear with us. And again, I would like to also remind everyone, hopefully this will be a discussion. You can ask a question and you can also share your opinion. Okay, again, if you need recommended reading materials, we are going to share in Faslun Facebook page or in the channel, inshallah. Okay. Yeah, Alhamdulillah. Thank you very much again for joining. Can we conclude, Ustaz?
Okay.
Okay.
Inshallah, we shall conclude.
Okay. Wabillahi taufiq wa hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.